moving at least a wee bit. Oh Lord, open my lips,
and my mouth shall declare praise. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Amen. Alleluia, alleluia.
Give glory to God, our light and our life.
Oh, come, let us worship Him.
Right. So, just a bit. We have the story this morning of a widow who gives 2 small pennies called a mite into the offering box, and Jesus commends her because she gave from her poverty. That is, she gave from what little she had instead of from her abundance. And that's kind of an interesting picture for us of what does it mean to sacrifice? What does it mean to give? So here you can see a picture of the woman putting the mite in right here, and Jesus commending her along the way. All right, let's do verse 2 of our gift. It's a 2-pager. These saints all receive God's condemnation. They live as children of His salvation. Through faith they conquered flame and sword and gallows. God's name to hallow. I can see that commendation and condemnation are too close together. Gotta watch that in these tricky hymns. Let us pray. Almighty and ever-living God, you have given exceedingly great and precious promises to those who trust in you. Grant us so firmly to believe in your Son, Jesus, that our faith may never be found wanting. Through the same Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Let us bless the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
The Almighty and merciful Lord, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, bless and preserve you.
Amen.
Off you go, youngins.
Yeah, I've been watching this on television.
Table talk is this Thursday at 7 o'clock at Thursday's Haircut and Brews. We look forward to seeing you there as best as you are able. I think last time we had about 20 maybe, somewhere in that neighborhood. Always lots of fun. And Bible classes continue as usual. Wednesday still at the Sorelli, Pastor Meyer?
Yes, this is our last week until next year.
Until next year, all right, very good. And Tuesday, Lifelight is already in recess until next year.
And Veterans Day concert today.
And Veterans Day concert today, which is not a Bible class.
Nor is
Not
that
cool.
Morales.
But you can tell me about it. What concert are you
Shepherd of
talking about?
Sierra Presbyterian Church at 6 o'clock.
Okay. 6 o'clock, speak to Pastor Meyer after Bible class if you are interested in learning more. How are we doing for volunteers, oh Gloria?
We are doing great, but we could use a few more people Friday, especially cleanup,
Friday,
What time is cleanup at?
12 to noon. I'm sorry, noon.
Sign me up.
Noon to 2 p.m.
noon to 2. Got it. So you want to pass that around, Gloria? Do you want?
Sure.
Would you like
And
to
if you want to fill in, if you want to come and join.
come and
more the
join,
merrier.
have some turkey, and do a bit of work along the way? Always be great. Thank you, Gloria. Photography, I think our photo sessions start this coming weekend also, right? Friday and Saturday, and then like the Monday, Tuesday the following week. So we are flipping right along with those. My plan, and I'll talk about this more next week at the voters meeting, but my plan is to take one of our bulletin boards in the fellowship hall and make a kind of a new member board with some pictures. I don't know about you, but I don't always remember names as I would like to, and so I'm going to try to get pictures and put some names and faces together for people. So working on it. Make sure they're the right faces and names. You don't want like flashcards or something. This is, I think, the last day for the seminary Christmas donation. There's been a little donation box outside the mail room.
It is.
Anything else? It is last day, so speak to
What
Michelle.
room do you go to the picture?
Pardon me, I believe that the pictures are actually going to be in the conference room. It was a little unclear to me on. Do you know that, Gloria? Do you remember how that finally finished with the
I
pictures?
think that is true.
Yeah.
Because I think they're going to do the Thanksgiving feast a little different on Friday.
Yeah. So I think that we're over there. And if you go over there and all you see are a bunch of turkeys, you may still be in the right place. But look for the photo thing. So I think I'm pretty sure it's over there still. Yeah, take a picture of a turkey. Speaking of voters meeting, next Sunday after second service. So like, I think we're going to do it at about 12 o'clock and try to have a little bit more substantive snack after second service for those of you going to second service. We're not doing a whole luncheon or anything. But we're going, yeah, it couldn't be much more substantive than the pancakes from this morning. Those are quite tasty, I'm sure. But that is next Sunday at 12 or so. So if you can be there, please plan on doing so. The big thing that we'll talk about is the budget for next year. But there are a number of other things that are also on the docket, looking at nominations for some synodical positions and other things. So if you can be there, we would appreciate it very much. And yesterday was our first God Bless America pancake breakfast. Norb isn't in here because I'm sure he's working. But it was, from my perspective at least, a smashing success. I would guess 150 to 175 people.
I heard 185 this morning.
185. Do I hear 190? 190. It was really a lot of fun. Thank you to yes, Patty.
And we had 7 preschool families there.
Yeah, we had a bunch of preschool families. A lot of people brought their friends and neighbors. I think it was really a great community event, especially as a starter for us while we're getting our act together. So if you see Norb, thank him because it really was a wonderful event. I have a couple pictures from that. Let me turn off the lights for a second. I've got a couple pictures. Something else too. So.
Yeah,
Yeah, so it was all outside. The weather was still nice, and the smoke was not bad in the morning yet, yesterday. By afternoon, you couldn't see the sun, but in the morning it was all right. All kind of helped. Our Higher Things Youth Group helped with some of the serving
My dog's not even there.
as well. And so there were lots of people. Ada had to bring her own egg to appreciated that Ada knew what she wanted and just took matters into her own hands. Yeah, Walt was there to take care of it. So that was very, very good. I'm not sure if Richard is helping at this point. Looking for more food. But yeah, Art set up his DJ equipment, so we had great music. We had a recognition for all of our veterans. It was lots of fun. Now on to the less fun, which is our this terrible fire, the campfire. This is what is left of Our Savior Lutheran Church in Paradise. So this is a picture while it was burning.
Thank you.
So, and I saw it from Pastor Merrick, who's the pastor there. They've been around for 54 years, something in that neighborhood, somewhere around there. So very said, this is Pastor Merrick and his family. The parsonage was also destroyed. So they lost everything, and the church. We have. We're taking a door offering for this morning, which is wonderful. Our Redeemer in Chico is kind of serving as the hub for kind of emergency contact and connection and things. So, Lord willing, at least in my limited experience with these kind of things, one of the things that is really needed often is to just have a sort of a quick influx of cash. Just that whatever is needed, you don't have to overthink it, basically. And so my hope is that we can take our door offering today and get it to them through our Redeemer very quickly in the next day or two, hopefully, so that they can do whatever they are able. I know that our district also gave them $20,000 from their emergency funds, and that the district is of course also going to be raising monies for this disaster response along the way. But we also have an interesting opportunity. We have some interesting connections with our Redeemer Chico, and that is
It's Redeemer.
It's Redeemer. Why don't you think our Redeemer? Well, it is our Redeemer, but the name of the church is Redeemer. Thank you, Pastor. And that is that Norma and Norb are kind of related to Pastor Jordan. Is he your brother-in-law? Am I remembering that right?
It's my brother-in-law.
Yeah, it's your brother-in-law. So we have some very close ties to Redeemer in Chico, and Norb of Pancake fame from yesterday is going up Friday night, and Saturday morning he's going to put on a pancake breakfast fundraiser for the fire victims at Redeemer in Chico. And he told me that he would welcome whatever help that he can get. He's going up with at least one other person I know, and that there are people at Redeemer that are going to help. But I don't know, honestly, what else we can do besides lend some bodies and some dollars. But if you have time and wherewithal to maybe spend a few hours on Saturday, talk to Norb, or talk to me, and I will get you in touch with Norb, and we'll kind of see. This is another kind of case of where there are going to be short-term things and there are going to be long-term things. The last numbers that I heard were 400 homes and about 300 businesses. Basically, all of the business properties in Paradise were leveled, were destroyed. And the last number lost of life I heard was 23.
24.
That's what I heard this morning.
24.
Yeah. So, and that will keep going up, I'm sure. But those are kind of short terms. I've had a couple other people talk to me about seeing if our congregation could help with a support group of some sort, grief counselor or crisis counselor. I don't know. I'm perfectly open to doing that or something to that effect, and we will kind of see how those things move forward along the way. But if you are interested in either some of that short-term or long-term, thank you, Dennis, help, I'm very, very open and welcome to that along the way. So there's lots to be done and lots of opportunities for service. We kind of heard a little bit about that in the sermon, that we are able to sacrifice and give because our Lord has given us all things. Dennis.
Just to say, I do want to say thank you to all of you who are in first service and already gave to the fire victims, because we've already given a generous amount, and it's great, but we need to keep going.
Yeah.
We need to keep going. And also I have something for the Myers,
Mm-hmm.
something for the Brams.
The Brahms
They
are
won,
not in
they're not here.
No. But I think those are from the drawing.
Yes, John and Gary.
So very important. Are there any other kind of announcements or comments or anything connected to that? Ada.
Yes, Pastor. The firefighters, they're putting their health at risk.
Yeah.
Because of inhaling the smoke, and it's a long-term thing.
It's scary business.
You know, they're my heroes, really.
Yeah.
Well, and like the policemen, like.
Right. The last that I heard yesterday, Katie, did Zach end up going up last night or not?
No, they needed less people. He's going up tonight.
He's going up tonight. Yeah. So Zach is a police officer, and so a lot of the services are kind of providing support work. So we will have others. I don't know if Curtis Craiglow is going up there. Reggie, do you know?
Not yet. He had to take his mom home up in Washington, so he may go when he gets home.
Yeah. So I'm sure that we will have others that are directly or indirectly affected by that. We will keep you all informed as we learn more. Any other comments or thoughts along the way here? All right, stay tuned. Are there any other announcements? I mentioned the voters meeting, didn't I? Yeah.
Yes.
I did. All right. Then let's get over to Matthew for a little while. So this is kind of where we finished last week, and talking about Peter's. Though everybody else falls away, I will never fall away. Even if I must die with you, I will not deny you. And all the disciples did the same. So we kind of ended last week with this picture from Matthew of all of the disciples are in the same boat. That there is none of them that are good, none of them that have got it all figured out. There are none of them that do everything right. There's no hero in the story. There's no, okay, well, this one guy, he got it all done. They are all painted in this same brush. And the picture that I would encourage you to continue to think and reflect on is always asking, where am I in the story? And the fact is that we would be right there with Peter. That we would be the ones that that believe we've got it all figured out, and would end up abandoning our Lord along the way. That's kind of that is definitely the picture that Matthew gives us here. Just kind of a little bit of a sense of the space here of where you can see things are going on. So we move from the upper room, which I believe is usually put someplace in this neighborhood. I don't see it on this map.
No, it's farther southwest.
Is it farther over here? Yeah. All right, thank you. So we go from there, and then we go over to the Garden of Gethsemane, where we will where we move for the prayer, essentially. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And taking with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me." And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." And he came to the disciples and found them asleep. So he goes to Gethsemane, to this olive garden. "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And he takes these 3. These are kind of his 3 closest companions. What other unique things do we have with Peter, James, and John that you can remember? Yeah, the Transfiguration is probably the most obvious one. We also get the, "Can you make my 2 sons sit at your right and left hand?" So there's a lot of different. These are kind of the inner circle of Jesus' disciples, which is itself already kind of an inner circle, right? So this is the group. And there are a couple words in here that I think are especially remarkable that are used to describe Jesus. We get the words sorrowful and troubled. And those are kind of amazing words when you think of it. What does it mean for God to be sorrowful and troubled? Catherine.
I don't know what it means, but what it does mean is it's not a sin.
Yeah, that's a part of what it means.
It's kind of, every once in a while you run into somebody who will say, it's sinful to be sorrowful. You should have the joy of Jesus in your heart.
Yep.
You shouldn't be depressed. And that just makes me happy.
That makes you happy.
That makes me happy that it's not sad.
Yeah.
It's not sad.
Well, it is interesting because when I hear words like sorrowful and troubled, those are definitely emotional. That's emotional language, right? That's emotional language, and there's an interesting relationship in the scriptures between emotion and sin. Okay, can an emotion be a sin?
Sure. I was going to say, depends on what.
I think that is a very it's not as obvious of an answer as you might think. So let me ask it a different way. Is lust an emotion?
Yeah.
It's a desire. It's an act of will. At what point anger? There are emotions, and I guess what I'm trying to get at here is that our emotions, like everything else about our humanity, have been twisted, broken, messed up in many and various ways because of sin. And so when we look at an emotion, I would suggest to you that we should not look at an emotion and say an emotion automatically is a sin or automatically isn't a sin. Okay? The emotions, like everything else when it comes to humanity, can be twisted and used for wrong purpose. And now when you kind of take the theological hat off for a minute and put the psychological hat on for a minute. A part of what you'll hear lots of talk in psychology about understanding our emotions and about recognizing emotions as a part of our being and not necessarily as a judgment. And I do think that there is a lot of benefit to that. A lot of benefit to that, believe me. And that's a part of what we can get from this with Jesus, is that Jesus is as human as you or me. And so he has these emotions of sorrow, trouble. I mean, when you read this, one of the words is, the word isn't on here, but I think that another word that I would use to describe his state here is either anxious or fearful. I mean, I think that's underneath that word trouble.
Because he's asking for relief.
Right. He is asking for relief. He's asking to be released from this cup that he mentions here. So when we talk about humanity, and especially let's take this, just because we're kind of in the middle of talking about and seeking how we can help people who have maybe lost everything. And a part of that process of learning how to process grief and loss is helping people give voice to their own loss and to their own grief. And that means, and this is very, very hard for Lutherans because we're right, but that means listening and allowing people to tell their story of what has happened. Because in giving people the freedom to tell their story, there is a sense where in the middle of grief where you kind of can't really process it until you can tell it. And it is very hard to tell your story in the middle of grief. And sometimes, it never happens, or sometimes it takes years. But being in a position where we can hear someone's story without judgment and without having to come up with solutions all the time is incredibly beneficial. And I don't mean that from the perspective of avoiding helping. What I'm saying is that listening is helping. That is doing something very, very hard. Because when you are listening to someone who is grieving, a part of what's happening is that you are taking that into yourself. That's called, and at some point, that can easily transform into compassion fatigue. I've talked about that language a few different times. Compassion fatigue is basically when you have been caring and serving others to the point, this happens a lot with caregivers especially, where you have been serving and giving and giving and giving and giving, where you start to take on the characteristics of whatever the woundedness and brokenness is of the people that you're caring for. That's called compassion fatigue. So there's a lot there, but I do find it remarkable in this in the level of humanity that we see in our Lord, and the things that we are in turn free to be human, free to grieve, free to be sorrowful, free to be afraid, free to pray. I mean, just think about what Jesus is praying for here is itself truly, truly amazing. Now, there are a couple hands. Jerry, then Dennis.
You mentioned that, when you're...
Speak up just a little bit here.
You mentioned when you're listening to the person and compassion. I think of two things, sympathy versus empathy. And, sympathy is, I feel sorry for you.
Right.
And empathy is, I feel sorry.
I feel your sorrow.
But it's building that connection.
Mm-hmm.
It's, how can you be useful to a person who is in a situation if you're just feeling sorry for them? But if you're taking on that pain, I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah, there's a lot there, isn't there? And of course, I know we have all kinds of different kinds of caregivers in this room here. Nurses, daughters, sons, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters. I mean, all of those are caregivers in different ways, and care receivers, right? So I am quite confident that all of you have stories that you could tell in connection with this. Dennis.
He doesn't say it here. He says sit here, but later on he says watch with me.
Yeah.
Which means praying with
Yeah.
me as I'm praying. So it is so hard for us to sit.
Mm-hmm.
When somebody's in pain, we want to fix it.
Yeah.
We want their pain to go away a lot of times because it makes us feel the pain.
Right.
And we're either feeling the pain or we're embarrassed by the pain.
Right.
We want it to go away.
Ashamed. Yeah.
We want it to go away.
Right.
And it's extremely hard to just watch.
Yeah. That remain. Those two words there, remain and watch. So be present, be alert. I mean, that's, you could kind of put those two things. I did want to make one mention of something else that Jerry mentioned, these words sympathy and empathy. And we have kind of, and your description is right on, Jerry. We have kind of misapplied, unfortunately, that word sympathy. Because the word sympathy literally means to suffer with someone. So the way that the word sympathy, if it were properly used, would actually be described as empathy. But we have sort of turned sympathy into almost like a pity power thing or something, something like that, where it's something that's not helpful, but it can become something else. I'm sure there's lots in there. So Jesus is both sorrowful and troubled, and he asks them to remain and to watch. And that word remain is such an interesting one, because notice what Jesus asks them to do, and what does Jesus not ask them to do? Right? He asks them to stay with him and to kind of be. This is probably a misapplication, but I'm going to use it anyways. And say to be, and he is asking to be present, but to be fully present, be kind of actively present. Don't look at your cell phone while I'm praying here, right? But actually be there.
Pay attention.
Don't just show up, but show up and be present. And so remain and watch. And we get that language of watch quite a bit. We will hear it again. We've heard it. We heard the word watch before when Jesus says, "Watch therefore, for you know not the hour or the time." But we will hear that remain language later on when Jesus says, I am with you always, even to the very end of the age. That's remain language, right? So Jesus promises and delivers what they are unable to do, because he is the remaining one. He is the one that is there, and he is the ever watchful one. He is the one that guards and keeps. So he does what they are unable to do for him. Andy, then Barbara.
I've always kind of felt that at this point, the disciples see, at least there are three here that he wanted to come with.
Right.
They see Jesus now differently than they have been. I mean,
Some ways, yeah.
they've been telling him, who are we going to go to? You have the words of eternal
Right.
life. He has all the answers.
Right.
And they tell him, he tells them things,
Right.
even when they don't understand it.
Right.
They, here he's sorrowful and troubled. To me, I think he doubts.
Yeah.
He's wondering. I mean, he's asking for this thing to be taken. He wants the cup taken from him. He's thinking, can I get out of this still?
Can you and I think there's an interesting tension there between the very human fear of not wanting to suffer, not wanting to hurt, and pain, and what I would suggest you don't see is him doubting God. You see him doubting the situation. You see him not liking the situation. You see him wanting the situation to change. But the one thing that he doesn't do in this prayer is doubt God. Now later on the cross we get a kind of an interesting one, which we'd have to go through John in order to really reflect on. But there we get, my God, why have you forsaken me? So that's a different question. But we're not talking about that. So we get it. Why does he fall on his face? It seems strange. Why does he fall on his face? Mary?
Well, I think that those two words, sorrowful and troubled, are low key because he's a human being and he knows exactly what's going to happen to him.
Right.
And so, to
Right.
me, I think troubled should be terrified.
Yeah. Troubled seems understated. Right.
Yeah, I mean, and
Right.
that's why he's falling on his face because he knows exactly what's going to happen to him. And why would you not beg your father to?
It's
not
surprising that he's
do this?
not more than troubled. Yeah. I'm sorry, Barbara, I missed you earlier, apologize.
Also, falling on his face was the posture that people gave when they prayed before God in the Old Testament.
Yep.
When they really wanted to show obedience to him, they prostrated themselves and fell on their face. The thing that strikes me as strange, though, is he says, my Father, if it be possible. Well, he knows to say, if it were possible, he knows the only way it would not be possible if God were to change his whole plan of salvation. And that was the whole thing that Christ's whole life was leading up to this point. So to say, if it be possible, is kind of strange.
Yeah.
To say.
I will try to look this up before next week to make sure that I'm right on this, but I'm pretty sure that is, in Greek, that's what's called a conditional sentence. And I'm pretty sure that's a contrary to fact conditional sentence. So that's sort of like saying, if it were possible that this would happen, I wish you would do it. But I know that it's not possible. I think that is the case there, but I can look that up now. Gloria, I think I see a bunch of
Same
hands.
thing. The fell on the face, I see it kind of as a total submission.
Yeah, humility,
His father's will.
submission. Yeah. Pastor Meyer and then Pastor Carl.
Well, yes, it's a conditional sentence, but then he underscores the
Right.
fourth petition.
Yep.
Thy will be done.
Yep.
there's no other way, but it's not gonna be happening like what we got.
Let the record show, however, that it's the third petition, not the fourth petition.
Right.
Because I just wanted to point that out. I have so few opportunities. Pastor Fro, welcome home.
Thank you.
Pastor Fro's been doing the vacancy at Grace in Grass Valley for the last 4 months, 5 months, something like that. And we installed my my dear friend Pastor Bonch there last Sunday afternoon, so they're back home. Welcome home.
I would like to ask a question about the cup. When I read the New Testament on the crucifixion, the pain and suffering that the Romans had worked into this procedure of crucifixion was enormous. But the scriptures do not mention this. And I think that's an interesting thing. They do not focus on the humanity of Christ at this point. And so my question is the cup that Jesus is facing here, the very thing you talked about just a minute ago, my God, why have you forsaken me? I mean, here we have what has been together from eternity, now must of necessity for the salvation of sinners. The Father must break with his Son and literally, as it were, turn his back on him.
Right.
Because he is the despised one.
Yeah. And that's the language of cup of wrath and cup of blessing that we get.
And that's why I think that cup is there's much more there.
Oh yeah.
I think
there's
than
a
meets the
lot
eye.
in there that and thinking from the perspective of Jesus was one with the Father, recognizes that in order to become one with his people again, he must be separated from his Father.
And that makes sense then in terms of the resurrection theology.
Right. That's right.
That follows. Yeah.
All right, Catherine and Julia.
Now, I know this is going to sound stupid, just embarrassing, but
I don't know how to respond to that.
He does. Smart guy.
you should not
Continue,
respond to
Catherine.
that. Okay, so what gets me with this is, if God is the creator of all things, of all the world, of all things, creator of man, creator of everything, who has to be satisfied in this sacrifice of Christ? Why can't God, in all his power and wisdom, just say, okay, we're going to call it good? It's like what greater power are they trying to satisfy with this sacrifice than God? God is God.
Okay. Trying to think of how to address that, and that is definitely a multi-class question. But
you're welcome.
Thanks. a part of what you see in the scriptures is the continual tension and balance between God's justice and God's mercy. That and that kind of gets at God's nature. That God is true, ultimately to himself and to his own nature and character. And so to ask God to just sort of foof it away is essentially asking God not to be God. That would be like asking me to be a Dodgers fan.
Well, now it makes sense.
I saw Mary sitting over there.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I just can't help myself. Now, what I'm trying to get at is simply that there is a sense where we do not fully understand the mystery of God's nature. That's for sure. And and that we recognize that God's justice and mercy do not contradict each other, but it sure feels like it sometimes. And I know that's not a complete answer, but this is kind of why we're getting to 26 and 27 here, is that that precise question. And it is amazing, because that's the question of the atonement. That's what that is.
If he was a God who could just say, and let it pass, then it would be a God who's capricious.
Yes. Yeah. And that's what I mean by God being consistent with his own nature and character. The fact that I don't fully understand God's own nature and character doesn't mean he doesn't have it. It means that I'm not God. Yeah. All right. Now there was a hand, Julia, and then Larry.
You can backtrack to the disciples being there a little bit.
That's okay.
Sorry.
Get me out of this.
Well, so when Jesus asked them to remain with him,
Yes.
reminded me of creation when God said it's not good for man to be alone. We're not made to be alone in anything. We're social creatures, and I think there's nothing kind of more, I mean, there's suffering in the world, and that's expected.
Yeah.
But to have to suffer or die alone, I feel like is almost worse, because at least when people can help bear our burdens.
Right. We bear one another burdens. That's even in the Bible.
And so even God didn't want to be alone once Jesus did
God in his creation, said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, that we are not created for that he has created us to be in community, and that community is his family, the church. And that's kind of how I would put it. One of the things that we're talking about in the Board of Elders right now, I'm really trying to get these guys to read and think, and boy, that's so hard. It's so hard, but it's fun. It's fun for me, at least. We're reading a couple articles on the church as family right now, and the relationship of and we've kind of used this language a lot around here, of thinking of the church as our family, and how does that model kind of play out in a society when the family is sort of disintegrating? What does that do to the church? If the primary model or picture of the church in the scriptures is that of the body and that of the family, and the family is kind of undergoing such radical transformation in our culture, what does that do to the church? And what are the temptations that we face? What are the struggles that we face? It's a really interesting conversation, because it is exactly that notion of community that tries to get at, and what does it mean to be a family today? And there's lots of interesting stuff. Larry, then Dennis.
Okay, moving you right back to...
I had no doubts. Good try, Julia. That's all right. It's all good.
It appears that I always wonder about when we get into these conversations, because it appears that leadership wants to basically say there are no outside forces with God. The only time that we recognize there's an outside force with God is in the Garden of Eden and the temptation. Well, doesn't there have to be an outside force with this? Isn't it from the very fall of Adam that God and the devil become in competition for souls?
I have come to expect nothing less from you than such penetrating questions. I mean that in all sincerity, because that does really get again at the heart of the matter of Jesus' death. Why does Jesus have to die? That's the question, right? Why does Jesus have to die? Why must justice be served? Why must there be consequences to sin? And where did this sin come from in the first place, darn it? I mean, those are kind of the underlying questions behind this whole story. And we come at that with a very specific lens of understanding, but it is always important for us to get back into this text and to ask these questions as well now, because I think that these questions of justice have deep implications for us as a culture, as a society. When we talk about families, when we talk about communities, when we talk about all of these things, this question continues to circle up. Dennis, then Mary, then I'm calling it because I'm running. I'm 3 minutes late right now. So
just a quick observation: it's not only the fact that families are under attack and we don't have family life as it used to be.
Yes.
The body is being under attack.
That's right.
The human body is practically meaningless in this culture, in this society. You can choose to be whatever body you want. And the problem being is it's the family, it's the body, and many churches have abandoned Christ because we don't need Christ hanging on the cross for us. We have grace. We have God loving us.
Right.
But they missed the point.
With no cost.
With no cost. They missed the point. There has to be justice.
Yeah. I certainly agree. That does not make our task of understanding easier.
No.
But it does mean that maybe we can start to get some clarity on what we're trying to get at. Mary.
So God decided to create human children, and we're sort of like herding cats. We as humans have to see good and evil. We have to see justice, and so I think that the only way that we could actually worship a creator that we can't see, we can't touch, is by this.
Is by God becoming man.
Right, and so unless we have human examples of things that happen bad to us or to someone else, we don't get the creator.
We don't get the connection at all. I think that you're right, Mary. And again, that doesn't answer all of the questions, but it starts to get at this underlying: why does God have to become man and die on the cross? I mean, if that is not the question, then we're probably still circling around something else. And how does that impact all of the suffering and everything else that we try to deal with? Well, I always knew that you guys could help me kind of keep it light. So good job. We will continue this conversation next week. Let's close with the benediction. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit. Amen.